Ready for it?
Sorry. Come on, bienvenue. Welcome to another property live stream. This is, of course, Cladding Matters with my podcast partner, Hamish McClay, and today's special guest, Matt Hodges-Long of the Building Safety Register. The premise originally, when we went to press, that was the title 275 homes lost. It turns out that Matt has just informed me, another bombshell, we were up by 100. 375 homes lost. Building Safety Register grows again. We're talking today about this grim milestone. It feels like a sudden sense of deja vu. We've seen this sort of thing before. The Building Safety Register post-Grenfell has the prohibition tracker has just been updated, adding 375 more residents to the list of people proactively decanted from their homes for fire and structural safety reasons. Madness. But before we get going properly, first of all, a word from illustrious leader Hamish McClay.
Last week we spent quite a time discussing the seriousness of a standard which was going to be adopted. The government wanted us to adopt, and various other people wanted us to adopt, which would have made properties continue to be unsafe and continue to have sort of fire risk attached to them. Now, that in itself is bad enough, and that is something which certainly needs to be cleared. But something which we don't spend as much time on, and we perhaps will be spending a bit more time on that. And we have a great advantage of having Matt with us today, Matt Hodges-Long, who actually sort of keeps a register of this. The government tend not to keep a particular sort of view on this, and certainly it's something that the mass media would not want us to be declaring and speaking an awful lot about, because we have a serious enough issues with people who are staying in their properties, the cladding issues which they have, the troubles they need to go through whilst everything's happening to them. Steve, at the moment, unfortunately, they're having their cladding allegedly improved, not to any safe standard, I might add. However, there are a number of people even having a worse scenario than that. And this is, of course, where sort of Matt's information sort of comes to light. And it was interesting to me. He sent some figures through. He's an amazing man with figures, is Matt. And he said just in 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we had less than 10,000 people who had actually been thrown out of their homes. They couldn't stay in the properties because of the dangers in those particular properties. At least with the cladding ones, they're suggesting they're sufficiently safe to keep them there. All one wonders about that on occasions. However, what about these people that are leaving? Now, of course, the thing is, it's not just a matter of a single guy. It's just a matter of additional family members, because a number of people have a partner. And not only do a number of people have a partner, it could be a wife or whatever, but they also have children too.
Of course.
So if you have to move from your property, and in fact, one of our team, we need to get her, we'll get her speaking about it, her experiences of being in a similar sort of kind of situation. But we have also added to that people who are in not a fit position themselves because they do have mobility issues. They're being supported in various homes, in various places, and they're having to be, put it subtly, turfed out because of the incompetent. But what we're finding now, of course, where buildings are falling apart, they're cracking, insufficient material, insufficient iron was sort of put in things like concrete, and all sorts of things are sort of being applied to it. But so we're speaking about a serious situation. If any of our listeners there, if somebody told you You've got 48 hours to get the hell out of here because you can't come back. Out you go. How would you actually sort of feel about that? And that is the majority of it, of course, will be very able-bodied. Hopefully, many of you wouldn't have the, I was going to say the encumbrance, wouldn't have to be concerned about your children and the schools they attend. There's so much.
Matt, welcome to the show. It's not. Yeah. I'm saying welcome to the show, but you're not bringing great news with you. I was reading through beforehand, and it's all very well turfing able-bodied people out, but then you've got things like sheltered housing scheme at Cumberland Towers. What a huge, monumental disruption it must be to their lives. Surely this is preventable, supportable in some way?
Yeah, it will vary from building to building, but I think the main thought that I have is one, in one sense, it's good that we now are understanding these risks and we're responding to these risks. Okay, so this is sort of come post Grenfell, where thou must go and inspect buildings, right? So as you inspect them, you find problems. I said to Sky a couple of years ago, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No.
So it's good, I think, for the greater good. It's great that we're not in blissful ignorance as much as we were before. So we're actually spotting these problems and we're saying we need to do something about it. But the flip side to that is it upends so many lives. And this is a really difficult one to square. And I think it's one that my experience with building managers and responsible persons, mechanical persons, people that are legally responsible for these buildings, is that they will decant or prohibit as a last resort. So they will allow people to live with quite a lot of risk prior to making that decision to say we need to close this building. And that line is amorphous. It's not cast in stone anywhere. It's based on opinion. So there could well be buildings that should be prohibited that aren't, others that have been that maybe shouldn't have been. And then sometimes this is exacerbated by money. So there might be mitigations in place that will allow that building to be lived in and not decanted, but then the money runs out. And at that point, the decision is taken. We need, that happened in Liverpool a couple of months ago, where the local authority just said, look, we can't spend any more money on temporary measures in this building, even though it's a private building. The money ran out and everybody had to leave. So yeah, it's a very difficult one and an area that we just do not know enough about, because I think Hamish, you asked me earlier on today, you sent me a message and said, well, if all of these people were out in 2023, are they back now? And the reality is I don't know. And to track all of these people, and it's something that should be done and we should be learning from, but it's something that's beyond my means and something that I've been pushing the government since 2021 to start counting, reporting on and following up on, but they fumbled so far. It's 5 years.
It seems to me that the human cost in all this, the mental health cost in all this is, it must be really hard to work out what that is or even how to ameliorate it.
Yeah, it is enormous, and I've met so many people that have been through this process, and it's still hard, having not been through that process, to actually fully understand the disruption. And I think Hamish was right mentioning about schools and things. You just imagine your doctor's appointments, hospitals. So if we take the latest structural decant in Stratford in East London, it sort of says that the housing provider, NHG, have provided homes for everybody in the area, but it doesn't really specify where or how far away. I mean, it's a really difficult job. If you empty some blocks of flats, 300 people or so, finding alternative accommodation for them, the likelihood is people will have been scattered over quite a wide area, which is massively disruptive in its own right, just purely logistically.
Really, in many cases.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and some of the reporting, and again, it's reporting. I'm not saying that this is what actually happened, but the reporting states that a lot of residents were notified at 1 o'clock in the afternoon that they had to be out by 5 o'clock that afternoon.
What?
Now, I have heard quotes from other buildings as low as 30 minutes. to get out. I mean, literally, you're just running with it. It's like somebody set the fire alarm off and you're never coming back. Other buildings have more of a run-up to this for you to sort of get prepared. There's a building down in Woking in Surrey that I was reading into that, again, is another structural, November 23, that was decanted, still not reoccupied. And initially, the residents were allowed back to collect belongings. And then very quickly that was revised. So then, you know, it's sort of the Marie Celeste sort of building with people's televisions in it and radios and toys and whatever, never to be occupied again because it's deemed to be so materially dangerous. They can't go back under controlled circumstances to take a piece of furniture out.
But it hasn't materially changed since when they were living in it. And they've probably been living in that condition for years, right?
Exactly. It's back. And these are all fairly modern buildings. These were all built within the last 15, 20 years, you know. So people are living. So again, as you work through the backlog of investigation, you will start to find more and more of these problems. And this is why I said to Sky 2 years ago in the article, I sort of quote it. I said, and that's why we're going to see this acceleration of forced evacuations over the coming 1, 2, 3 years as this housing stock gets investigated more. And that was 2 years ago. And that, I think, as Hamish mentioned, we've seen a 50% increase in the number of people, or the number of people has increased by 50% in the last 2 years from the 5 years before. So it's first 5 years post Grenfell, about 10,000 people. And then the following 2 years, another 5,000. So we are seeing an acceleration. It's not as quick as I thought it would be, but that's a lot of people. That's a lot of disruption.
So we've got these 4 buildings registered and high-risk buildings with the building safety regulator.
Yeah.
I mean, as I read in we've now moving. This channel was primarily about cladding, but it's almost like we've taken the skirts off. And now we're seeing the ripped petticoats underneath. And so the focus is now moving towards structural integrity and so historic design choices and construction practices. But I heard that even with this dearth of evidence that this has been done, it hasn't necessarily changed.
No, the focus of the regulator is, I mean, we help a lot of buildings get through that regulatory process, so that's the main bit of what we do, and the regulator's focus has really shifted in recent months and years to structural stability. So that the regulator, the higher risk building safety act in occupation, focuses on fire and structural integrity. They're the 2 areas of risk, not Legionella or lifts or, you know, electrical safety or whatever, just fire and structural integrity. And it was all about, for obvious reasons, post Grenfell, it was all about fire. And now we're seeing more structure coming through. And actually, in terms of the propensity to harm lots of people, a sudden uncontrolled structural collapse would be huge in a negative way. And they've started to issue information now about punching shear, transfer slab risks and things. That's where a building goes up and then it sort of has a deck and then the building pops out of the top, but the top bit bears its weight on the slab at the bottom rather than columns all the way down to the ground. And the risk is that those columns punch through that level and the whole thing goes. And apologies to any structural engineers watching that I probably just completely mangled a way, but I try to bring things into language for everybody. And so that's a risk that they've become aware of. And then you sort of look at the Halo development in Stratford, which is rumoured to be a transfer slab punching shear issue. And you can see why, once you've seen that and you're aware of it and you've got the calculations that you say, we cannot let people stay in this place a moment longer. Whereas fire tends to creep up and you can mitigate it more effectively. Or we'll put a sprinkler system in or a temporary alarm system or whatever to keep it controlled. Whereas no amount of acroprops is going to stop that building going if it goes once it's gone, right? So that will trigger a prohibition far quicker than if it's a fire-related prohibition solely. So yeah, and I've commissioned structural engineers on projects with our clients where the regulator will go back and say, I need more information on this structure, and they keep coming back on structure. Once they've ticked all the fireboxes, they're obsessed about structure. So, and that's a fairly new change of focus for the regulator.
Hamish, it seems to me that we have a big enough problem with the exacerbation of new immigrants and so on and so forth. We're now effectively throwing indirectly or directly more people onto the street, because not everybody, when they do this major move, is going to be satisfied or capable of coping with that massive change in location, and they'll end up on the street. I mean, this is a massive problem we're building for ourselves.
Well, or haven't built for ourselves.
Well, yes.
It's sort of very, very difficult to sort of comprehend from somebody in the government sort of position. I mean, one of the comments that sort of Matt sort of made to me sort of said, well, it's just unfortunate the government aren't keeping records. The government should be keeping records of this, but they're challenged with all sorts of idiotic sort of, I say idiotic, they're not idiotic things. Their focus is on, if you like, outside of the UK. It's a little bit like we're sort of saying that we're very fortunate as my work has progressed in terms of what I do for my business. I've found it's as important what goes on outside of your property as goes on within your property, because there's a lot of things happening. And the trouble is the government, they're relying on very, very basic aspects of what they propose doing, what they propose improving. And when you actually sort of think they're putting so much effort into looking at sort of migrants and things like, they haven't contemplated what can we do for these people that we've found out about already that have to be decanted. I remember I saw a decanting, for example. It used to be a lovely, lovely word. I mean, the sort of thing you had a sherry decanter. Very partial to a nice bit of sherry, but the thing is, but it used there was some interesting connotation. This, when we're decanting people, we're decanting their lives. We're affecting their lives, and there is no major provision for it. Now, like Matt said, you can't tell where it is. The saddest aspect is there are so many buildings that haven't yet been interrogated. They haven't been inspected. We haven't found out about those yet. If we can't cope with what we have, the situation that we do have, with that now over 15,000, which 2 years ago was 10,000, what's going to happen as we progress, as we find the other buildings? And when you actually sort of look at this, the situation, and the worst of it is, as Matt said, how many of those are finding their way back into their homes? So there is a massive, massive great, but we don't hear about it. The media's not speaking about it. The government's not speaking about it. Or if it is, it's very, very quiet, in quiet little corridors sort of here and there. But it's somebody like Matt, and it is such an important thing like this. Issues of cladding is vitally important with the standards are maintained there. But it's vitally important we have enough people. We don't have enough regulators either, do we? I mean, this is one of the tragedies. We do not have enough experienced people in this country to cope with what's going on internally, never mind what's trying to get in at the same time. And we just are not keeping pace with that. So we've got this, if you like, a disorder going on, and we're still trying to cope with this additional sort of population. So quite where the two meet up, until somebody starts speaking strategies, we're really, really in a serious position. There aren't enough Matts about. I mean, Matt and his company are restricted to what they can do. Right. We need more people like Matt about. We need more people trained up. People need to focus. And when you actually sort of think of the number of people without work, they could be trained to doing things like this.
There's plenty of raw material ready to be trained up. I'm certain of it. Matt, I just had a thought. I remember when Steve was estimating the amount of homes that were subject to cladding issues and that couldn't move forward, often weren't even able to be lived in because of the fire safety, 16,000 of them. Now, we pull off those outside skirts, as I said before, during the remediation process, likelihood is we're going to come across more shoddy building practices, etc., which could then lead to yet more of this chaos.
Yeah. Well, if you take the building in Woking that I mentioned, that had an external wall cladding remediation program that was completed. And as a part of, or around the same time that they finished that, they spotted the structural issues, which then led to the complete evacuation in 2023 of that building that has never been reoccupied, but it's got a lovely external wall on it now that isn't combustible.
Delightful. But what I was going to say is, I'm a great believer in property. If it happens once, it's going to happen 100 times. So therefore, if the same process happened on another building, we could end up we're sleepwalking into a housing disaster.
Well, this is tying into what Steve does. This is why we're looking at sort of the full building safety remediation, of internal remediation, all that sort of stuff. Because what I would normally say to people, or what I always say to people is, look, if the external wall has been built badly or shoddily, or not in a non-compliant way, why would they suddenly have upped their standards internally within the building?
No reason at all.
It's a systemic problem. And it's one that you haven't asked the question yet, but I'll throw it in terms of what we do about it, is that one of the things I have been pushing for, and why the government needs to measure this, is because local authorities need to start planning from this from a contingency perspective. So does the average local council, if we take Suffolk or Suffolk County Council or Ipswich City Council or whatever it's called, with the tower, were they prepared and have they been drilled in how to deal with a mass decant, especially of sheltered housing residents?
I think we both know the answer to that question.
Yeah,
and
but they
are. You're quite right. It was the next question on my list. What the hell?
Oh, right. Okay. So it's to my mind, it would be a reasonable expectation for them to at least have a discussion about this and say, well, if that were to happen in our area, how many buildings might there be? Where do we think there may be some issues? What would we do if, as a part of their contingency
and then
plan?
If you had to evacuate, decant, or I don't know what you call it. Decant seems like a nice
horrible,
word.
But
it's horrible.
It's not. However you describe this, it's not a nice thing to talk about.
No, it's a bloody disaster. So they need to have in their mind suitable places where these people can stay or live.
Yes.
You know, and I just don't think there is a disaster.
And the other thing that goes with that is what assistance is provided and how long does it last for. So I know you've spoken to Melissa White before in terms of her thinking of how normally there's a prelude to this happening from a property management perspective. You kind of know that you might be heading towards that outcome. So the ability to actually manage this and sort of mitigate some of the emotional distress is absolutely there. And again, that's something where the government should step in and say, look, you know, there is a code of practice, if you like, or best practice for managing this process, how you communicate, who you communicate with, how you support people, which isn't necessarily just get out by 4 o'clock or, you know, ring this number and wait in line and we'll try and find you somewhere to live, you know, that. And I know that sometimes these are genuine emergencies in the same way that if you had a big fire in a building, it would be an emergency response. But where you do have a run-in, these things can be planned.
One last question before I pass back to Hamish. We've talked about this point with a view to cladding, which is these buildings are relatively young. I mean, the Parthenon is several thousand years old and it's still standing. Yet these buildings are 15 years old with shoddy practices, now not fit for human habitation. Should it not be the builders that bear the brunt of the expense of fixing this?
Do you like me to answer that?
Yeah,
I think if they're responsible for it, they should compensate, and in a lot of cases they are. So a lot of these buildings are being fixed through the developer contract, the developer pledge. So therefore, right, you know, company X is stepping in, paying for alternative accommodation, fixing the problem, etc. I don't think that goes anywhere near making those people whole. if they could ever be made whole. I mean, it's better than no funding at all, but it's still very basic. And then you do get into the whole PAS tolerable life safety critical defects discussion that we've been back and forth on, which is different to saying, look, do you know what, we're gonna buy this property back off you and we're going to compensate you fully, etc., which has been done in places like Croydon, where leaseholders were bought out. Another building in Ipswich, where now whether they were fully compensated or not, I don't know, but they were bought out of their homes, and those buildings have now been demolished or are being rebuilt. So they were that bad. But in general, I think residents suck up a lot of this cost and distress, completely uncompensated.
That's wrong, isn't it? That's every shade of wrong. Hamish, we've got to bring this podcast to a close. So would you kindly take us home, please?
Well, I think that the sad news, I think we've just sort of pretty well demonstrated right the way around. We don't have sufficient knowledge of exactly what the problem is. We haven't found out how big it is. And one of the worst things, when we do have councils, and Steve's local councils, I mean, they're a fine one to make an example of. They're trying to do down the importance of allowing them to sort of live in properties that are safe from fire. What's going to happen when we start looking at the structures of some of those buildings within sort of Greenwich, within that particular sort of area, within that particular type of region? What could they also find within Royal Artillery Quays? And I think the worst of it is, and sort of Matt hit there, and it's not one of those things, because as life progresses, we learn new. It's what we don't know that, because, I mean, we know that science, technology, and so many things are expanding rapidly. And then there's a realization, oh, crikey, we hadn't thought about those particular buildings. And therefore, no allowance has been made by each of those councils. But do our councillors that we're electing, or well, some of them are not allowed to really elect, are we, this year? But those councils, are they really fit? Are the councillors fit for purpose? To be perfectly honest, do we not need to start looking at the depth of what they're actually looking into, what they're preparing? They're all strapped for cash, councils. Nobody's going to find that extra money. When Matt looks at, and some of those things like Matt's just said, I dread to think what the cost is to rehouse 375 people. It is going to cost, but we speak about it as a cost, but it's the disruption to lives, the planning, the preparation. So much needs to be done with those. And as Matt is saying, so many aren't actually getting back into those properties. So
it's a travesty. It's a travesty.
There's so much that needs to be thought out about the whole process, which is why it's so important that we drive home repeatedly that until the seriousness of all of these things are actually sort of out there and being taken notice of, that we do need to keep on reminding people. We don't want to be depressing about the whole thing, but hey, let's start putting some planning in place. Let some of you councillors out there, hopefully there'll be councillors, won't we start thinking of the structures of your properties, never mind the cladding issues, and for heaven's sake, what are we building at the moment? How safe are they going to be in 10 and 15 years?
Good Lord. As I said, there are many structures that I can point to. They've been up for over 1,000 years. It seems crazy that we can't make a series of dwellings that last more than 15. That seems ridiculous. Are we going backwards in our ability to build things? I'm sure that there are lots of people out there shouting at the screen right now. But all I'd say to all of you is, at Cladding Matters, we're here to try and rattle sabers, but also try and bring to the attention of the people that matter that these things need remediation in such a way that people's lives aren't destroyed in the process. It's the human cost that worries me as much as the physical. So thank you once again, Matt. As ever, your facts and figures, scary though they may be, are very useful, and at least we know a bit more about the size of the problem. Hamish McClay, as ever, Thanks for having put together this podcast in the first place to help more people understand what the issues really are. To all of you watching, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and try in these troubled times to look after your mental health. Until next week, bye-bye.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish through the moon, but their word always fails.